Geopolitics are one of those things that most fiction do not handle very well, mostly because many writers don't fully understand how complex political relations really are, or they let their own political worldview cloud the reality of how such systems actually work. And it's easy to understand why. Geopolitics are very, very complex. Even simple conflicts get more and more complicated the more you dive deeper into the details on how they started, because there's always one more trivia, one more detail, one more angle that completely changes your perception of this seemingly simple conflict. But to even start designing a fictional geopolitical landscape, we need to ask ourselves first, what even are geopolitics? At its core, geopolitics is about how nations and factions interact and how geography shapes those interactions. But that definition is very broad and it doesn't really help us in terms of writing and world building. So let me explain it like this. Imagine you're playing poker. Poker is not a balanced game. It heavily relies on luck. Your opening hand depends on the cards you're dealt. In geopolitics, your quote-unquote hand might include climate, which will determine if your land is a fertile paradise or a frozen wasteland and how much it shapes the culture of your people. Geography, which will determine if you are located in mountains, humid jungles, or swamps, or let's say a particularly lucrative coastline between two major powers. Resources, which will determine your access to natural minerals, animals or plants that are native to your land, and how they benefit your people. In addition to those cards, you might also get some bad event cards, let's call them. For example, natural disasters, disease outbreaks, the crime rates and banditry in the region. There are of course way more cards that play into it besides the geographical traits, like for example socio-political stability, the support of the current government, the cultural norms, the strength of your army, technological advancement, and many, many more that are situational and also affect what you can do with your geographical position. And most important of all, you cannot swap those geopolitical cards that you've been handed. You might get as a country, as a nation, a very bad hand, and well, you can complain that it's not fair and this country have a better starting position because of the minerals and all that stuff, but well, the world isn't fair and never has been. In geopolitics, you accept the cards that you've been dealt, and while you try to play them in the best of your ability to either strengthen your position, gain power or stability, or do, well, whatever the hell you want. How do you start designing the geopolitical landscape of your world? Well, it always starts with what you already have, or, well, want to have. Let's say you already designed a map and you want to make a geopolitical landscape between nations. If you already mapped those nations without any thought, then that's fine. Even if the borders that you drew do not make any sense geographically, then you can make it make sense through other aspects of geopolitics. Remember that geography is not the only reason why borders are formed, even with the pre-modern nations. In my video about world-building cultures, I talk quite a lot about borders between nations and how they can differ based not only on geography but the politics of nation, some past events, or maybe the differences in administration or resource availability, and many, many more. Like, for example, modern North African countries that have very straight line borders around the Sahara Desert. Because, yeah, who cares if you'll take 20 additional square miles of sand? Contrary to lush forested areas where even a single mile can make a very big difference in the availability of resources, or can make a nation very vulnerable because, well, let's say that single mile was a crucial mountain pass or a bridgehead that was a huge natural obstacle that guaranteed the safety of a nation. Whenever you think that something doesn't make any sense from one aspect of geopolitics, but, well, you want it to be that way either way because, well, it's your fictional world and you just want that, well, then you can change a different aspect of geopolitics to justify that specific choice. And especially if you're designing a fantasy map in a fantasy setting where magic exists, then, well, you can use magic as yet another aspect of forming borders. When you are done with forming borders and nations, now we can proceed with the actual politics. So let's start with the question, what makes geopolitics interesting and intriguing, so much so that people actually debate and discuss who they would support and why one side is correct and the other isn't in a fictional setting? I would argue that complexity and depth of factions, as well as the established web of connections and dependencies between those factions, is one of the crucial things that makes them so interesting and intriguing. About a year ago, I made a video about war-building factions in Fallout New Vegas, and there I explained in detail why they are so well done and executed. So if you want a very detailed breakdown of a very specific example, you can check that video. But in short, factions in geopolitics usually go into one of three very general and broad camps. The first one is major players. You can call them local superpowers. It's usually an empire or maybe a couple of very strong, very militaristic kingdoms who are, let's say, the biggest boys in the playground, and those who dictate the flow of politics in the entire region. They and their conflicts are usually the source of all conflicts or, well, ripple effects in the entire continent or region, and their politics often downstream to smaller factions. As a real-world example of this, we can take World War II, where a war between major political and military powers in Europe engulfed most of the world in war because of how much influence they had over those regions. Even in faraway corners where those European countries are not involved directly or even indirectly, those local factions still consider this conflict as a chance for big changes because of who takes part in that conflict. The second camp is the minor players, which are factions/nations that are not strong enough to be superpowers, but they do have enough strength and or influence to be a consideration by the major players in terms of any conflicts and as a very useful tool or a potential micro threat. The examples of that could be smaller kingdoms with strong military and good geographical positions, or maybe some city-states. Powerful wealthy guilds maybe, like a merchant guild or something similar. The reason why the major players cannot just stomp those minor players is usually because they do have a strategic meaning, or if united they would pose a genuine threat, or they can be a leverage against the other major player in the game of dominance. And the third one are miscellaneous. Those are very small factions that usually don't have enough influence to be of any note, or their goals are completely unrelated to the politics happening in the region. However, they are still important in terms of writing and world-building geopolitics, because they might not be that noteworthy in the macro scale, but in terms of micro scale, their influence can be meaningful for one or two settlements, for example. They can be a group of brigands living in the border regions, a minor religion or cult that exists in this extremely specific region, and they do influence 1, 2, maybe 3 settlements. And something very important that you need to remember about those 3 categorizations is that even within the same group of factions, those factions don't need to be equal to each other. As an example, I really like Novigrad in Witcher 3. Novigrad is a city-state, a port town that is bordering 2 major players, the Kingdom of Redania and the Nilfgaardian Empire. Novigrad is not a major player, not by any stretch. It cannot be of any threat to both of those factions. However, it is a rich port town with massive trade, and it can potentially be a heavy fortified city fortress for one of the factions because it sits in the border between them. And in Witcher 3 you can see that there are small micro factions within Novigrad fighting each other, and some of them do represent the interest of one of the big players. The Witch Hunters, for example, are a religious dogmatic faction that is actually just an extension of the Kingdom of Redania. Later on in the game we encounter a confederation of conspirators who are indirectly working for Nilfgaard, and within these factions there is someone who also have its own political goals in mind. You have the intertwined major players fighting over the influence and wealth of a minor player, using miscellaneous factions as their pawns to take over the minor player or destabilize it and weaken it. One of the most common mistakes in world-building geopolitics is excluding internal factions from the roster of geopolitics. Sure, geopolitics are mostly done within nations, but internal factions like, for example, a merchant guild or a big mercenary company, or just political opposition to the current ruler, might play a very big role in the relations between nations. Of course, geopolitics is so much more complex than what you saw in that video and will require further explanation. So you can treat that specific video as more of an introduction to the concept and some baseline, let's say, and I will expand upon this concept in the future videos. And with all that being said, see you in the next video.